She's so good. She gets it right that, you know, she's right on the ball, that Margaret. Let's now share screen. Okay. We're good? If you can't see the document, raise your hand or scream or something. All right.
We can see the document. We can see it.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right. So just a reminder of our schedule. Here we are today. No class next Sunday. Labor Day, Erev Rosh Hashanah. We got the whole bit. So the next time we're meeting is in 2 weeks from today. There's going to be an email going out with this schedule. And as a reminder, in a month from now, during Chol HaMoed Sukkot, if people are available on that Sunday, we'll learn something that'll be fun and fantastic. And it won't relate to our curriculum so that the people who can't make it won't miss anything. Okay, Jewish meditation. We've covered the Amidah, Hitbodeduth, and we're on Ruach HaKodesh, or Enlightenment. And what we've discovered so far is that meditation is at the core of Jewish spiritual living in many different forms. And we're having this eye-opening tour through those various forms. Ruach HaKodesh, or Enlightenment in particular, has a lot of different forms. So we're going through them one by one. We've learned that on the overall, Ruach HaKodesh, according to Rabbi Kaplan, is achieved by working on yourself. Working on yourself meaning that you're developing specific personality characteristics, and he even goes as far as to identify 10, from study through purity, through humility, through holiness. How do you do that? Obviously, we were the originators of the personal growth and human resource development movement. What's it all about? So we learned a little bit about the Musar movement and the study of texts with religious and moral and ethical teachings. And you go through a meditation to see how they actually apply to your life. You meditate on a specific quality you want to develop in yourself. And we talked about ways to do that, a lot of which end up in a conversation with God. So even though he didn't say it formally, Rabbi Kaplan has led us to understand that you are enlisting God as your partner in your own personal development, which absolutely makes sense because we want to become more like God. And you're kind of adopting him as your teacher and mentor to develop qualities which make you more like him. And Rabbi Kaplan, among many wise people, tells us that the way you get close to God is by emulating God. So we spend a lot of time on the techniques for conversing with God. And we'll kind of treat this as a cycle. So we're going to get back to some of this because it needs reinforcement and it's essential. And since these are new ideas and new skills, we're going to go over them on a periodic basis so that we can really integrate them. Recently, we discussed the form of meditation called Kavanah. And what was interesting is that we have commonly thought Kavanah to be a thing, like I have Kavanah, I have concentration. But as Rabbi Kaplan explained to us, it's a process. It is something you do through having achieved a meditative skill of controlling the contents of your mind and directing them on a very specific topic. So when we say you have, for instance, that you have to say the Shema with Kavanah, that's a process. You are focusing your understanding of what you're saying on the words that you're repeating, that the words that you're saying. You're applying your mind to what you're saying. It's very profound mindfulness. So Kavanah is one of those words in Hebrew that comes close to paralleling what in English is called mindfulness. You're applying your mind on what you're doing. Okay. So, and he did leave off and tell us that there are specific Kavanah meditations, which are very advanced meditations, which we're not ready to get into. Hopefully at some point we will, after we work our way up to that point. But that's something he always says. There's kind of like beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels, and beginner, intermediate, and advanced skills involved in different forms of meditation. And the higher up the ladder you go, the higher your consciousness is. What that means is we're going to have to explore. Okay, so in this journey of discovering different forms of meditation, specifically related to working on yourself and achieving Ruach HaKodesh, another one is Hitbonenuth, which we're going to discuss today. What does Rabbi Kaplan say about that? Okay. Another important Hebrew term associated with meditation, excuse me, is Hitbonenuth. Translated literally, this word means self-understanding. It reflects a somewhat different type of meditation. Normally, we look at things dispassionately and objectively. I may look at a leaf and even examine it very closely, but it does not affect me in any way. I am exactly the same person after as I was before. It does not change my state of consciousness at all. My mind is the same looking at the leaf as it would be otherwise. However, I may also look at the leaf with the aim of using it to attain a higher level of consciousness or a greater degree of self-awareness. I would then be using the leaf as a means to achieve self-understanding or Hitbonenuth. You know how they say beauty is in the eyes of the beholder? Consciousness is in the eyes of the beholder. The great Jewish philosopher Moses Maimonides, the Rambam, speaks about using Hitbonenuth meditation while contemplating God's creation. One can achieve a profound love for God through such contemplation. This is effective precisely because it is not merely a single contemplation of various aspects of God's creation, but is understanding oneself as part of this creation. When one sees God's creation and understands one's own role as part of it, one can develop a deep and lasting love for God. Who has not gone out into the fields on a clear night and gazed at the stars, yearning to unlock their secrets? One thinks about the vast, unfathomable reaches of the universe and stands in rapt awe. For many people, this in itself can be a religious experience. It is an experience that can bring a person to feel a profound humility before the infinite vastness of the universe. The next step is to go beyond the physical and contemplate the fact that this vast universe, with all its countless stars and galaxies, was all created by God. One ponders the fact that one ineffable being created everything. We realize how different this being must be from us, and yet we feel a certain closeness. The final step is Hitbonenuth, understanding oneself in the light of this creation. At this level, one asks the question, if God created this vast universe, then who am I? How do I fit into all of this? At the same time, one may feel privileged that God allows us to have a direct relationship with him. Imagine that the creator of all the stars and galaxies desires to listen to me. Not only that, but he is concerned about me. Realizing God's greatness and at the same time contemplating the closeness to him that he allows us to enjoy is precisely what can bring a person to profound love for God. Okay. The psalmist expressed this when he said, I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars that you have established. What is man that you remember him? A son of Adam that you even consider him? Yet you have made him a little less than divine. You have adorned him with glory and honor. You made him master over all your creatures and placed everything under his feet. That's from Psalm 8. We realize how insignificant we should be in God's eyes, and yet how significant we really are. So, really interesting. So you first, so Rabbi Kaplan, to explain, first of all, he's defining Hitbonenuth as self-understanding. Self-understanding meaning you get an idea of your role in the scheme of things. Not just in your everyday life, but in the overall scheme of creation. How do you do that? So he's quoting the Rambam. And the Rambam says that should start with contemplating what we call nature. Why? Because that's how you can get an immediate feeling of awe. You go out to the woods, you go out to the desert, you go out wherever you can feel awe. And then then based on what we know, what we've learned as Jews, we say, wow, this was created by Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Oh my goodness, how great and wonderful is he who created all this stuff. Okay, and yet, here you are, standing in your place in all this creation, you've got a role to play. So the fact that you recognize that you're part of the scheme of things is, as Rabbi Kaplan puts it, is a way of loving God, because you realize there's a place for you, that this almighty being created such a wonderful world, and yet it has a place for you. Here you are. You're standing in the woods. You're standing in the desert. There's a reason why you're there. What is the reason? Okay, so this is how he's encouraging you get to the point where you're like, wow, so there must be something for me to do here. There's this rhyme and reason to the whole Bria, to the whole creation, and it includes me. So there must be a job for me to do. Really interesting. So that thinking gets you on the path to Hitbonenuth. Now, I'm going to harken back to what we discussed a few weeks ago, to Avraham Avinu, to Abraham, because Rabbi Kaplan posed him as somebody who went through this process, who actually contemplated the universe and the workings of the sun and the moon and the celestial bodies. And he figured out, as the Rambam describes, that, yeah, there's a prime mover behind all these things that are moving. And as Rabbi Kaplan says, once you start thinking about that, you start thinking about your life as we just described. You have a place in that whole scheme of things. What is it? And then, as Rabbi Kaplan described to us, you discover God. And this is the process that you use to discover God. You realize you realize before whom you are standing, that created this whole thing. And what happens? You try to understand the large picture, and then you try to understand the micro picture that involves you. And to reconcile the two, to try to bring the two together, what did he say? Rabbi Kaplan, you talk to God, because it's through conversing, it's through verbalizing that we kind of integrate our worlds. And we even have a record, a part of that conversation that Abraham Avinu had. He started conversing with God, and the Torah records at least God's part of that conversation, at least part of it saying, Lech Lecha. So what's so interesting is that Abraham Avinu looked at the macro, felt the micro, tried to integrate the two of the conversation, and the Torah at least gives us a snippet of that conversation. And interestingly, what happened as a result of that conversation that Abraham had with God is he moved. He picked up his family, picked up the clan, and they went to Canaan. So he deduced from thinking about his role in the scheme of things that he had to move. Now the Torah is phrasing that as like a command, Lech Lecha, like Abraham was told to do this, but with our increased understanding of how these things work, we can acknowledge that it was a product of a conversation Abraham had with God after having discovered God and wanting to get to know God, at least to the point where we get an understanding of how he should work with God. So that's what we're talking about here. Then Rabbi Kaplan goes on to explain that Hitbonenuth meditation can be focused on anything, a stone, a leaf, a flower, or an idea. One allows the subject to fill the mind and then uses it as a means to understand the self. It is a type of mirror in which one can see oneself in the light of true reality. Using this mirror, one can see the divine within oneself. Indeed, this may be the mirror aspaklaria of prophecy described in the Talmud. When one looks into this mirror and sees the divine within oneself, one can also communicate with the divine. All right, this is beyond, I think, our knowledge base at the present time. I think using what the Rambam teaches is probably going to help us more by going to a place, a physical place, in which it's easier to feel awe. Rabbi Kaplan, being very advanced, can understand how you can use an abstract idea and then pivot into this feeling of awe and appreciate the universe. But you got to be, I think, more advanced than we're at the present time to do that. Okay. The final important Hebrew word for meditation is Hitbodeduth. This is the most specific term for meditation, and one that was used as early as the 10th century. So we got some history here in terms of Jewish meditation. Literally, the word means self-isolation, and for this reason, the term escaped the notice of many students of Jewish mysticism. Many scholars have translated Hitbodeduth simply as seclusion or isolation, not really realizing that it refers to meditation. It's not just physically withdrawing yourself, it's a frame of mind. The key to this term is to be found in a text by Moses, Maimonides' son, Abraham. In another book, which we discussed a bit, Meditation in the Bible, he quotes Abraham ben Maimon, the Rambam's son, extensively. He was quite the meditator, the son of the Rambam. He writes that there are two types of isolation, external self-isolation and internal self-isolation. External self-isolation simply involves being alone physically, going off to the fields, climbing up a mountain outside Tucson, or woods or caves, anywhere from the other people. This, however, is the only first step. External isolation is the doorway to internal self-isolation. Internal self-isolation consists in holding the mind from all outward sensation and then even from thought itself. From what one reads in most non-Jewish classical texts, this is what is usually defined as the meditative state. Therefore, Hitbodeduth is the Hebrew term for any practice that brings a person into the meditative state. It is a state in which the mind is isolated, standing alone without any sensation or thought. That's also pretty advanced. But several points here. First of all, as he has said, meditation is meditation is meditation is meditation. Peoples and cultures throughout time and in many different places have meditated, and we're doing it. We're all doing similar things here. We're doing it from a Jewish point of view, with a different hashkafa, with a different worldview, but the process and the skills being developed are the same. So Rabbi Kaplan is saying that going into what non-Jewish people say is a meditative state is the state of Hitbodeduth. It is known that sensory deprivation can help a person attain higher states of consciousness. Indeed, there are places in large cities where a person can buy time in a sensory deprivation chamber. In such a perfectly dark, soundproof chamber, one floats in a dense liquid at body temperature. Cut off completely from all outward stimuli, the mind can go off totally on its own and float towards higher states of consciousness. True meditation, however, does not require a sensory deprivation chamber. Rather, by using a meditative practice, one can blank out all outside stimuli at will. At the same time, one also blanks out all extraneous thought, filling the mind with the subject of one's meditation. This is Hitbodeduth, self-isolation in a meditative sense. Okay, so he is, in a roundabout way, talking about what we do at the end of this class. We're talking about developing the ability to focus on something and blocking out the rest, blocking out what's happening around us and blocking out what's happening inside our mind. Okay, getting to a point where there's nothing going on, that's also very advanced, and he's made reference to that, so that you have like no mind. That's right up there. And we're not close to that at the present time, but we're on a stepping stone towards that by developing the skill to control everything that's going on in our mind. Okay. Okay. Good. So this is the end of his current survey of different types of meditation. And we're going to pick this up in 2 weeks. Now, let us go to Bhante. Bhante. And again, Bhante is a Buddhist, and he has an extremely strong grasp of meditation, and he articulates lessons about meditation in a very lucid and clear way. So that's why we're using him. He's talking about the same stuff we've been talking about with Rabbi Kaplan. And in particular, we're talking about dealing with distractions and understanding mental states so that we can, so we can get insights into how to improve our own personal meditative practice. We are right here. Okay. Just to review for a second, the way he's describing this is you're meditating and maybe thoughts or feelings pop into your mind on an individual basis. Okay. Deeper than that is a mental state, something that occupies, let's say, your whole mind, a very profound feeling. And that's a much more to deal with than just a single thought or feeling. Mental state is more comprehensive. And we need to be aware because they have more pull on us than an individual thought or feeling would. An entire mental state can just suck us up our energy and carry us way far from the meditation. So he wants us to be aware of them. And just as we would with individual thoughts or feelings, we need to develop the skill to catch the mental state subconsciously before it pops up into our consciousness, because then it's really got a lot of, it's like a hurricane. It's like it's picked up a lot of momentum and energy, and it's harder to resist. It's harder to pull ourselves away from it. But the thing is that to catch it subconsciously, you need to use your sensory awareness. You need to get a feel for it. It's not in your conscious mind. You need to, and therefore you don't use your conceptual, analytical, perceptual mechanism. You kind of use your gut type of thing. And that's how you sense it coming. Okay. And most recently, he talked about, well, one way to neutralize your conscious mind, to be able to start using your gut, is to focus on not using the ego type of thing, meaning, that's meaning that you're relating into the thought or the feeling or to the mental state. And the technique that he's advising to bypass the ego involvement is using mindfulness, as he always says, and saying, oh, that's me relating to my state of agitation, or that's me relating to that state of joy. Oh, I had this profound feeling of joy because I attended a wedding last night, well, that's me relating to the profound feeling of joy type of thing. So you take a step back and using your mindfulness, see that that's what you're doing. And that's by using mindfulness, gaining even further control over the contents of your mind. Okay, so the general idea is almost too simple. You want to really see each sensation, whether it is pain or bliss or boredom. You want to experience that thing fully in its natural and unadulterated form. And there is only one way to do this. Your timing has to be precise. Your awareness of each sensation must coordinate exactly with the arising of that sensation. If you catch it just a bit too late, you miss the beginning. You won't get all of it. If you hang on to any sensation past the time when it has faded away, then what you are holding on to is a memory. The thing itself is gone. And by holding on to that memory, you miss the arising of the next sensation. Be here now is what he's talking about. It is a very delicate operation. You've got to cruise along right here in the present, picking things up and letting things drop with no delays whatsoever. It takes a very light touch. Your relation to sensation should never be one of past or future, but always of the simple and immediate now. The human mind seeks to conceptualize phenomena, and it has developed a host of clever ways to do it. Every simple sensation will trigger a burst of conceptual thinking if you give the mind its way. Let us take hearing, for example. You are sitting in meditation and somebody in the next room drops a dish. The sound strikes your ear. Instantly, you see a picture of that other room. You probably see a person dropping a dish too. If this is a familiar environment, say your own home, you probably will have a 3D Technicolor mind movie of who did the dropping and which dish was dropped. This whole sequence presents itself to consciousness instantly. It just jumps out of the unconscious, so bright and clear and compelling that it shoves everything else out of sight. What happens to the original sensation, the pure experience of hearing? It gets lost in the shuffle, completely overwhelmed and forgotten. We miss reality. We enter a world of fantasy. So some of the words may be a little bit, it takes some getting used to the way he's describing it, but he's right. So that's a very good example of how we add mental stuff onto a physical sensation. Just imagine if we did that. It would be a sound that came and went in an instant, paying no mind to it. That's an example of a very experienced meditator and somebody who has a huge amount of control over what his mind does, so that he doesn't add all that mental stuff onto the physical experience. Here is another example. You are sitting in meditation and a sound strikes your ear. It is just an indistinct noise, sort of a muffled crunch. It could be anything. What happens next will probably be something like this. What was that? Who did that? Where did that come from? How far away was that? Is it dangerous? And on you go, getting no answers but your fantasy projection. Okay, we're going to stop here because I don't want to flood everybody. Okay. But there you go. We're getting a further understanding of how we conceptualize and therefore cause our own distractions when meditating, and just take yourself out of the meditative scenario for a second and just see how we do that in ordinary life. Somebody says something, what do you mean by that? Whoa. You know, all kinds of insecurities or preconceived notions and this and that come, and we add all this stuff. You know, you could see how it just clogs the works when dealing with people or when dealing with situations. So, and therefore, just as controlling our conceptualizing enhances our meditation, controlling our conceptualizing enhances our ordinary living. So that is yet another example of how the skills we develop in meditation transfer into everyday life. Okay, so speaking of meditation, we're about to do that right now. We will stop the share and we will ask Margaret to stop the recording.